The autumn of 1814 brought with it a change in the London air that had nothing to do with the turning of the seasons. Mary Ann Whitmore stood at the window of her modest townhouse in Bloomsbury, watching the amber leaves spiral down from the plane trees that lined the street. Her reflection in the glass showed a young woman of 22, with dark hair pinned simply at the nape of her neck and eyes the color of honey in afternoon light. She had been preparing herself for this moment for weeks, yet now that the evening had arrived, her heart beat with an unfamiliar rhythm of both anticipation and dread. The invitation to the Ashworth ball had come as a surprise. Lady Catherine Ashworth, a distant connection through her mother's family, had extended the courtesy with a brief note that suggested obligation more than genuine welcome. Mary Ann understood the unspoken message. In the rigid hierarchy of English society, her family occupied that uncomfortable middle ground between the respectable gentry and the truly fashionable. Her father, though a gentleman of impeccable character and modest means, lacked a title. Her mother, who had passed 3 winters ago, had been the daughter of a baron, but that connection had grown tenuous with time and distance. Still, an invitation was an invitation, and Mary Ann had never been one to shrink from opportunity simply because it came wrapped in ambiguity. Her friend Eleanor had been horrified when Mary Ann announced her intention to attend. Eleanor, dear and loyal despite her tendency toward melodrama, had clutched Mary Ann's hands and warned her of the vipers that populated such gatherings. She spoke of Lady Beatrice Ashford with particular venom, describing the woman as beautiful and cruel in equal measure, a combination that made her both admired and feared throughout the ton. Mary Ann had listened patiently to Eleanor's warnings, but she had already made her decision. For too long she had allowed the whispers and sidelong glances to keep her confined to the margins of society. Her mother had taught her that dignity was not inherited but chosen, that grace under pressure revealed true character. Tonight would be a test of those teachings, and Mary Ann intended to pass with her head held high. Her father appeared in the doorway, his evening clothes slightly out of fashion but perfectly maintained, a testament to his careful stewardship of their limited resources. Thomas Whitmore was a man who had aged well, his silver-threaded hair and lined face lending him an air of distinguished wisdom. He studied his daughter with the mixture of pride and protectiveness that had characterized his parenting since his wife's death. "You look like your mother," he said softly, and Mary Ann saw the familiar shadow of grief pass across his features. 3 years had dulled the sharp edge of loss, but the ache remained, a constant companion that neither of them spoke of much anymore. "Thank you, Papa." She crossed the room to kiss his cheek. "I promise to be home at a reasonable hour." He caught her hand, his grip firm. "You need make no promises to me, my dear. Simply remember who you are. No title, no fortune, no one's good opinion can add to or diminish your worth. You carry yourself with the same grace and strength your mother possessed, and that is worth more than all the coronets in England." The words settled over her like a warm cloak, bolstering her courage for the evening ahead. The carriage ride through London's evening streets gave her time to observe the transformation of the city from day to night. Gas lamps flickered to life along the boulevards, and the sound of music and laughter drifted from open windows. The season was in full swing, that peculiar ritual of courtship and competition that dominated the lives of England's elite families. The Ashworth residence in Mayfair blazed with light, its Palladian facade gleaming white in the darkness. Carriages lined the street, disgorging passengers in elaborate evening dress. Mary Ann smoothed the skirts of her gown, a simple but elegant creation in pale blue silk that her mother's seamstress had helped her fashion. She had no jewels beyond her mother's modest pearls, no elaborate coiffure studded with ostrich feathers and diamonds, but as she joined the stream of guests ascending the marble steps, she reminded herself that authenticity required no ornamentation. The ballroom stole her breath. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across walls, hung with gilt mirrors and portraits of Ashworth ancestors. The polished parquet floor reflected the swirling colors of ladies' gowns, like a kaleidoscope, while an orchestra played from a raised dais at the far end of the room. The scent of hothouse flowers mingled with perfume and beeswax candles, creating an atmosphere of refined opulence. Mary Ann accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and positioned herself near a column at the room's edge, a vantage point that allowed observation without demanding attention. She recognized many faces from her limited social encounters, noting with interest the complex choreography of social interaction. Matrons clustered together, their fans moving in rhythmic accompaniment to their gossip. Young ladies preened and postured, their eyes darting toward the groups of gentlemen who lounged near the refreshment tables with studied casualness. And then she saw her. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood at the room's centre like a queen holding court, surrounded by admirers who orbited her beauty with gravitational inevitability. She wore a gown of crimson silk that should have been scandalous in its richness, but somehow appeared merely magnificent. Diamonds glittered at her throat and in her elaborately dressed golden hair. Her face possessed that particular English perfection of fine features and porcelain skin, but it was her eyes that captured attention. Blue as winter ice, they surveyed the room with an assessing intelligence that missed nothing. Those eyes found Mary Ann. The moment stretched, fraught with unspoken challenge. Lady Beatrice's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something dark passing across her perfect features, before she turned back to her admirers with a practiced smile. But Mary Ann had seen it, that flash of hostility, and she understood with sudden clarity that Eleanor's warnings had not been melodramatic exaggeration. "Miss Whitmore, what a delightful surprise!" Lady Catherine Ashworth materialized beside her, her greeting pitched just loud enough to draw attention. The woman was a study in contradictions, her warm words belied by the calculation in her eyes. She had issued the invitation, yes, but that did not make Mary Ann a welcome guest. Lady Catherine was merely performing the social obligations of a distant connection, her courtesy a form of public virtue signalling rather than genuine hospitality. "Lady Ashworth, thank you so much for including me this evening. Your home is magnificent." "Indeed." Lady Catherine's smile was as brittle as spun sugar. "We do pride ourselves on hosting the finest gatherings of the season. I see you've come alone. Such courage. Many young ladies would find our assemblies rather intimidating without proper sponsorship." The barb was delivered with such sweet poison that a lesser person might have missed the insult entirely. But Mary Ann had grown up watching her mother navigate the subtle cruelties of society with unfailing grace. She met Lady Catherine's gaze with steady composure. "My father always taught me that character is its own sponsorship, my lady. I find that principle serves me well in all circumstances." A flicker of surprise crossed Lady Catherine's face, quickly replaced by a tight smile. Before she could respond, a commotion near the ballroom entrance drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow, and Mary Ann found herself staring at the man who had become London's most discussed figure. Duke Alexander Sinclair was not conventionally handsome in the way of drawing-room favourites. His features were too strong, his presence too commanding, his intelligence too evident in eyes that seemed to see past society's elaborate masks. He stood well over 6 feet, with dark hair and the kind of aristocratic bearing that came from generations of unquestioned authority. But there was something else, something that set him apart from the typical nobleman. He moved through the crowd with an air of someone who had earned his position, rather than merely inherited it, and his reputation for political reform and unconventional views had made him both admired and controversial. Lady Beatrice immediately detached herself from her admirers and glided toward the Duke with predatory grace. Mary Ann watched the encounter with fascination, noting how the Duke greeted Lady Beatrice with perfect courtesy, but without the warmth she so clearly expected. His attention seemed to wander even as she spoke, his gaze sweeping the ballroom with what appeared to be mild disinterest. And then his eyes found Mary Ann. The connection was instantaneous and inexplicable. Across the crowded ballroom, through the swirl of dancers and the press of guests, their gazes locked with an intensity that made the rest of the room blur into insignificance. Mary Ann felt her breath catch, her carefully maintained composure threatening to desert her entirely. There was recognition in his eyes, though they had never met. Recognition and something more, something that sent heat rushing through her veins, despite the impropriety of such a reaction to a stranger's glance. Lady Beatrice followed the direction of the Duke's attention, and Mary Ann saw fury flash across her beautiful face before she mastered it. The transformation was remarkable in its speed and completeness. One moment, genuine rage twisted her features. The next, she had reassembled her mask of gracious perfection, though her eyes remained chips of ice. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice's voice carried across the sudden quiet that had fallen over their corner of the room. You must allow me to introduce you to the most charming people. Lady Hertford has been dying to discuss your recent speech in Parliament, and Lord Westmore claims to have found a stallion that might interest you." But the Duke was already moving, cutting through the crowd with purposeful strides that sent ripples of speculation through the assembly. He walked directly toward Marianne, ignoring the whispers that erupted in his wake, his focus absolute and unwavering. Marianne's heart hammered against her ribs. She was acutely aware of every eye in the ballroom turning toward her, of Lady Beatrice's barely contained fury, of Lady Catherine's shocked expression. The Duke stopped before her, and up close he was even more imposing, his presence filling her entire field of vision. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of England's highest circles, but warmed by something genuine underneath. "Though I confess to hoping we would meet, I'm Alexander Sinclair." Protocol dictated that she should wait for a proper introduction, that accepting his direct address violated countless unspoken rules of social engagement. But Marianne had never been one to bow to convention when authenticity beckoned. "Marianne Whitmore, Your Grace." She executed a perfect curtsy, grateful for her mother's insistence on teaching her proper deportment, despite their modest circumstances. "Miss Whitmore." He spoke her name as though testing its weight and finding it satisfactory. "I wonder if you might honor me with the next dance. I believe they're about to play a waltz." The request sent shockwaves through the assembled guests. The waltz was still considered rather scandalous in certain circles, its intimate hold and close proximity a source of endless debate among society's arbiters. For the Duke to request a waltz as his first dance with an unknown young woman was unprecedented. For him to do so while standing in full view of Lady Beatrice, who had made her expectations of his favour abundantly clear, was nothing short of revolutionary. Marianne heard Lady Beatrice's sharp intake of breath, saw the woman's hands clench into fists at her sides, before she remembered herself and relaxed them with visible effort. Every instinct screamed at Marianne to refuse, to protect herself from the storm of gossip and speculation that would inevitably follow. But she looked into the Duke's eyes and saw something that made her throw caution aside. Honesty. Pure, unvarnished honesty, free from artifice or game-playing. "I would be honored, Your Grace." His smile transformed his face, revealing a warmth that belied his reputation for cool reserve. He offered his arm, and she placed her hand lightly upon it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine wool of his coat. As they moved toward the dance floor, Marianne heard Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "She shouldn't be here." The words were pitched to carry, delivered with just enough volume to ensure half the room heard them while maintaining a veneer of discretion. Marianne felt the Duke stiffen beside her, felt his arm tense beneath her fingers. He turned slowly, his expression that of a man exercising tremendous restraint. "I beg your pardon, Lady Beatrice." The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Lady Beatrice's smile grew strained, her perfect composure beginning to crack around the edges. She had overplayed her hand, allowed her jealousy to push her into open rudeness, and now faced the consequences of that miscalculation. "I merely meant that Miss Whitmore must be finding our little gathering overwhelming," Lady Beatrice said, her voice dripping false concern. "Perhaps she would be more comfortable in quieter surroundings. I understand her circumstances are rather reduced. She cannot be accustomed to occasions of this nature." The insult was delivered with such sweetness that it might have passed for kindness to anyone not listening carefully. But Marianne heard the venom beneath the sugar, recognized the attempt to humiliate her publicly, and drive her from the field. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself with dignity, but the Duke spoke first. "On the contrary, Lady Beatrice, Miss Whitmore demonstrates precisely the qualities one hopes to find at a gathering of supposedly civilized individuals: grace, courtesy, and genuine presence. Perhaps if you spent less time concerning yourself with others' circumstances and more time cultivating those virtues yourself, you might find life more rewarding." The assembled guests gasped collectively, a sound like wind through autumn leaves. No one spoke to Lady Beatrice that way. No one challenged her publicly or questioned her behavior. She was too beautiful, too well-connected, too powerful within their narrow social sphere. But the Duke had done exactly that, and his words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Lady Beatrice's face flushed scarlet, her composure finally shattering completely. "How dare you?" "I dare because I choose to," the Duke interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that silenced her mid-sentence. "And I choose to dance with Miss Whitmore, if you'll excuse us." He guided Marianne onto the dance floor as the orchestra struck up the opening notes of the waltz. Other couples joined them, creating a swirl of movement and colour. But Marianne was aware only of the Duke's hand at her waist, of his other hand engulfing hers, of the way he led her through the steps with effortless expertise. They danced in silence for several measures, the music flowing around them like water. Marianne forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain the composure that had carried her this far. But inside, her thoughts churned with confusion and wonder. Why had he defended her? Why had he risked social awkwardness and Lady Beatrice's wrath for a woman he'd only just met? "You're wondering why," he said, as though reading her thoughts. She met his eyes, finding them warm with something that might have been amusement. "Your Grace is perceptive. Alexander, please, I find titles tedious except when absolutely necessary." "That seems rather unconventional for a duke." "I've never been particularly conventional. My father despaired of me regularly." A shadow crossed his face, quickly banished. "He passed 2 years ago, leaving me with responsibilities I'm still learning to navigate, and a healthy skepticism of arbitrary social hierarchies." They turned in perfect synchronization, the world spinning around them. Marianne found herself relaxing into the dance, her body responding instinctively to his lead. She had learned to waltz in her mother's drawing room, practicing with her father while her mother played the pianoforte. The memory brought a bittersweet ache, but also strength. "You haven't answered my question," she ventured. "No, I suppose I haven't." He was quiet for another turn, his expression growing thoughtful. "I saw you standing by that column, watching everything with such careful attention. You weren't playing any games, weren't putting on a performance for potential suitors or social advancement. You were simply present, genuinely present. Do you know how rare that is in these circles? I suspect I'm rare because I'm different, not necessarily in a way that's valued. Different is exactly what's valued, at least by those with the wisdom to recognize it." His grip on her hand tightened fractionally. "I've spent the last 3 months being paraded before every eligible lady in London, like a prize bull at a country fair. They simper and pose and say exactly what they think I want to hear. Lady Beatrice has been particularly relentless in her pursuit, and I'll admit to finding it exhausting." Marianne couldn't help a small laugh. "Your Grace Alexander, you do realize that by dancing with me, you've just made yourself the subject of tomorrow's gossip columns and made me the target of Lady Beatrice's considerable animosity." "Good," he said with such satisfaction that she blinked in surprise. "Perhaps now she'll understand that her attentions are unwelcome and redirect them elsewhere. As for the gossip, let them talk. I've found that those who matter don't mind, and those who mind don't matter. That's a dangerous philosophy for someone in your position. Perhaps, but it's the only one I can live with." His expression grew more serious. "I meant what I said, Marianne. May I call you Marianne?" The use of her given name sent a thrill through her, despite knowing she should protest the familiarity. "If you wish." "I do wish. And I wish to know more about you. Where you come from, what you think about, what makes you laugh." He smiled, and it transformed his severe features into something approaching boyish charm. "Though perhaps we should have that conversation somewhere less public. Will you take a turn with me in the gardens after this dance?" Common sense demanded she refuse. She barely knew him, and accepting such an invitation would only fuel the gossip that was doubtless already spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine interest there, the complete absence of the superficiality that characterized most of her social interactions, Marianne found herself nodding. "I would like that very much." The waltz concluded to polite applause, and Alexander offered his arm once more. They moved through the crowd toward the French doors that opened onto the gardens, aware of every eye following their progress. Marianne caught a glimpse of Lady Beatrice's face, saw rage and humiliation warring there, and felt a flutter of genuine apprehension. She had made an enemy tonight, and not just any enemy, but one with the power and inclination to make her life difficult. The night air was cool against her heated skin as they stepped onto the terrace. The garden stretched before them, paths winding through carefully tended beds, and past marble statuary that gleamed white in the moonlight. Other couples strolled at discreet distances, their chaperones maintaining vigilant watch from the terrace. Alexander guided her down the steps and along a path that led deeper into the garden, where the sounds of the ballroom faded to a distant murmur. "Tell me about your mother," he said suddenly. "You carry yourself with a grace that speaks of excellent teaching." The request surprised her into honest response. She was extraordinary. Not in the way society typically measures such things. She had no title, no fortune. But she possessed a kind of inner strength that I'm still trying to understand. She taught me that dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It's a choice we make in how we respond to the world. She sounds remarkable. She was. She died 3 years ago, and I think about her every day. Marianne paused beside a fountain, its water catching the moonlight in silvery cascades. Losing her was like losing my compass. I've been trying to find my way ever since. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his profile stark against the darkness. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge of vulnerability she hadn't heard before. My father and I were never close. He was a man of rigid principles and traditional values. We argued constantly about everything from politics to philosophy. When he died, I felt cheated. Cheated of the chance to ever truly know him, to bridge the gap between us. So I think I understand something of that lost compass feeling. They stood in companionable silence, two people who had been strangers an hour ago, but who now shared something precious and rare. Marianne felt the last of her reserve crumbling, replaced by a cautious hope that perhaps, despite all the obstacles of class and circumstance, a genuine connection might be possible. "I made a wish tonight," she said softly, the words emerging before she could consider their wisdom. "Standing at my window before coming here, watching the moon rise over London, I wished for courage, for the strength to be myself without apology, regardless of others' judgment." Alexander turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I heard that wish," he said, his voice low and intimate, "or perhaps I made the same one. Either way, I intend to help make it come true." "Why?" The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Why me? You could have any woman in that ballroom, women with titles and fortunes and all the advantages I lack. Because you're real." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she chose, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was impossibly tender, and Marianne felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness of it. Because in a world of performance and pretense, you dare to be genuine. That's worth more than all the titles in England. A sound from the terrace made them both turn. Lady Beatrice stood silhouetted in the doorway, her posture rigid with fury. Even from this distance, Marianne could feel the weight of her hatred, the promise of consequences yet to come. "I should return to the ballroom," Marianne said reluctantly. "My absence will be noted, and I've already caused enough scandal for one evening." "You've caused nothing," Alexander said firmly. "The scandal, if there is one, is entirely of Lady Beatrice's making. But you're right that we should return. I wouldn't want to compromise your reputation further." They walked back toward the ballroom, the moment in the garden settling over Marianne like a precious secret. She knew that everything had changed tonight, that she had crossed some invisible threshold from which there was no retreat. Lady Beatrice would not forgive this slight, would not rest until she had found a way to punish Marianne for daring to capture the Duke's attention. But looking at Alexander's profile in the lamplight, seeing the determination in his eyes, Marianne found she couldn't regret a single moment. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength her mother had shown, the same dignity that was her birthright regardless of rank or fortune. As they re-entered the ballroom, the whispers rose like a tide around them. Lady Beatrice watched from across the room, her beautiful face a mask of cold fury. Lady Catherine fluttered nearby, clearly torn between disapproval and excitement at being tangentially involved in such drama. Eleanor appeared at Marianne's elbow the moment Alexander excused himself to greet his host, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and admiration. "Marianne!" Eleanor hissed, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? Lady Beatrice will destroy you for this. She's been pursuing the Duke all season, and you've just waltzed in, literally waltzed in, and captured his complete attention in the space of one evening. "I didn't set out to capture anyone's attention," Marianne said wearily. The evening's emotional intensity was beginning to take its toll, and she suddenly wanted nothing more than to be home, safe in the quiet of her father's library. "I simply accepted an invitation to dance. An invitation from the Duke himself, given while Lady Beatrice was standing right there expecting him to dance with her. My dear, you've just declared war, whether you meant to or not." Marianne looked across the ballroom to where Lady Beatrice held court, surrounded by her usual admirers, but with eyes only for the Duke, who was now engaged in conversation with Lord Ashworth. The look on Lady Beatrice's face was one of calculation rather than simple anger, and Marianne felt a chill of foreboding. "Then war it shall be," she said quietly, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "I won't apologize for being myself, Eleanor. I won't make myself small and insignificant to soothe someone else's wounded pride." Eleanor studied her friend's face with growing respect. "You've changed somehow. There's a steel in you I haven't seen before." Perhaps it was always there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Marianne squeezed her friend's hand. "My mother used to say that we never know our own strength until circumstances demand we use it. Tonight demanded it, and I discovered I'm stronger than I thought." The evening wore on with agonizing slowness. Marianne endured the stares and whispers with as much grace as she could muster, accepting dances from several gentlemen who approached more out of curiosity than genuine interest. Alexander didn't ask her to dance again, wisdom perhaps dictating that discretion was advisable after their dramatic first waltz. But she felt his eyes on her throughout the evening, a steady presence that both comforted and unnerved her. When she finally made her farewells to Lady Catherine, whose manner had grown decidedly cooler, Marianne felt the evening's accumulated tension drain from her shoulders. The carriage ride home through darkened streets gave her time to process everything that had happened, to marvel at the unexpected turn her life had taken in the space of a few hours. Her father waited up for her, as she had known he would, sitting in his favorite chair beside the library fire, with a book open in his lap. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from welcome to concern as he saw her face. "Well," he said mildly, setting aside his book, "I take it the evening was eventful." Marianne sank into the chair opposite him, suddenly too exhausted to maintain her composure any longer. "Papa, I think I may have made a terrible mistake, or a courageous choice. Sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the two." He leaned forward, his expression gentle. "Tell me everything." So she did, spilling out the entire evening in a rush of words. The Duke's unexpected attention, Lady Beatrice's fury, the waltz and the garden, and the promise of something precious growing between two people who had no business forming such a connection, given the vast gulf in their stations. Her father listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as though seeking wisdom in its dancing flames. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. "Your mother and I were not a match that society would have chosen. She was a baron's daughter. I was a gentleman of modest means with no prospects beyond a small estate and a head for business. Her family disapproved, her friends predicted disaster. But we chose each other anyway, and every day of our marriage was proof that love matters more than lineage. But the Duke is a man, not a title. A man who saw something in you worth risking scandal and social awkwardness to pursue. That suggests he has uncommon sense and courage." Her father's smile was tinged with sadness. "I won't pretend the path ahead will be easy. Lady Beatrice sounds like a formidable enemy, and society doesn't easily forgive those who transgress its invisible boundaries. But you are my daughter, and your mother's daughter. You carry her strength and her grace. Whatever comes, you have the fortitude to face it." Marianne felt tears slide down her cheeks, the emotional weight of the evening finally finding release. Her father crossed to her chair and pulled her into his arms, holding her as he had when she was a child seeking comfort from childhood terrors. But she was no longer a child, and the terrors she faced now were far more complex than monsters hiding under beds. "What do I do, Papa?" "You be yourself, my dear, exactly as your mother taught you. You meet whatever comes with dignity and grace. And you remember that no one, Not Lady Beatrice, not the censorious tongues of society, not even the Duke himself, can diminish your worth unless you allow them to. Those words sustained her through the difficult days that followed. The morning papers carried veiled references to a surprising romantic development at the Ashworth ball, and within 2 days, the gossip columns were speculating openly about the Duke's interest in an unknown miss of respectable but modest means. Some coverage was merely curious. Some was openly hostile, questioning Marianne's presumption in setting her cap at so far above her station. The most vicious attacks came from sources clearly connected to Lady Beatrice. Anonymous columns questioned Marianne's breeding, her family's finances, even her mother's virtue. The lies were sophisticated enough to carry a veneer of plausibility while remaining just vague enough to avoid actionable defamation. Eleanor reported that Lady Beatrice was conducting a systematic campaign to isolate Marianne socially. Invitations that might have come to someone who'd captured the Duke's attention were mysteriously not forthcoming. Ladies who had been cordial enough in the past now cut her directly on the street. The message was clear: align yourself with the Whitmore girl and face Lady Beatrice's considerable displeasure. Through it all, Marianne maintained her composure with a strength that surprised even herself. She continued her usual routines, her charitable work at the orphanage, her weekly visits to Eleanor, her quiet evenings with her father. She refused to hide or apologize, walking through Hyde Park during the fashionable hour with her head high despite the stares and whispers. And then, a week after the Ashworth ball, Alexander called. The morning Alexander called, Marianne was in the small conservatory at the back of their townhouse, tending to the herbs her mother had planted years ago. Rosemary and thyme flourished in their terracotta pots, along with lavender that filled the air with its calming scent. She found peace in this simple task, her hands in the soil connecting her to memories of her mother's patient instruction on the medicinal properties of each plant. Mrs. Hastings, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with an expression hovering between scandalized excitement and worry. The woman had been with their family since before Marianne was born, and her protective instincts were legendary. "Miss Marianne, His Grace the Duke of Sinclair is in the drawing-room requesting to see you. Your father is entertaining him, but I thought you should know immediately." She paused, wringing her hands. "My dear, is this wise? The talk in the markets has been most unkind." Marianne set down her gardening shears, her heart suddenly racing. A week had passed since the Ashworth ball, a week of whispers and subtle cruelties that had tested her resolve daily. She had wondered if Alexander's interest had been momentary, an impulse regretted in the cold light of day. His appearance now sent relief flooding through her, followed quickly by trepidation about what his visit might mean. "Thank you, Mrs. Hastings. Please tell my father I'll be down directly." She rushed to her room, suddenly conscious of her simple morning dress and the dirt under her fingernails. A quick wash and a change into something more presentable consumed precious minutes. She chose a day dress of sprigged muslin, elegant in its simplicity, and pinned up the tendrils of hair that had escaped during her gardening. Her reflection showed flushed cheeks and bright eyes, excitement she couldn't quite suppress despite her best efforts at composure. The drawing room, though modest compared to the grand salons of Mayfair, had been her mother's pride. Simple but elegant furnishings created an atmosphere of comfortable refinement, and the morning light streaming through the windows gave the space a warm glow. Alexander stood beside the fireplace in conversation with her father, his tall frame somehow making the room seem smaller. He wore morning dress with casual elegance, and when he turned at her entrance, the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Miss Whitmore." He bowed formally, acknowledging the proprieties even as his gaze told a different story. "Thank you for receiving me. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Your Grace. We're honored by your visit." She executed a curtsy, hyper-aware of her father's watchful presence. Thomas Whitmore studied them both with the shrewd assessment of a man who had navigated society's complexities through careful observation. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he smiled and moved toward the door. "I have some correspondence to attend to. I trust you'll observe all proper conventions, Marianne. The door remains open, naturally." When they were alone, or as alone as propriety allowed, with Mrs. Hastings positioned strategically in the hallway, Alexander's formal manner softened. He crossed to where she stood, maintaining a respectful distance, but near enough that she caught the scent of his cologne. something subtle and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "I've thought of nothing but you this past week," he said quietly. "I wanted to call sooner, but my solicitor advised discretion. The gossip has been rather intense." "I've noticed." She managed a wry smile. "I'm apparently a scheming adventuress determined to trap you into an unsuitable marriage, according to the Morning Chronicle's society column." His jaw tightened. "I've identified the source of those particular lies. Lady Beatrice has been remarkably industrious in her campaign against you. I expected nothing less. A woman scorned and all that." Marianne moved to the window, needing distance to think clearly. His presence affected her too strongly, clouding her judgment. "Alexander, perhaps we should consider that she might be right. Not about my character, but about the unsuitability of any connection between us. The difference in our stations is irrelevant." He crossed to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "Marianne, look at me." She turned, finding his face closer than expected. This near, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow that suggested some childhood mishap, the stubble shadowing his jaw that gave him a less civilized appearance than his polished exterior suggested. "I'm 28 years old," he said, "old enough to make my own decisions without society's permission. I've done my duty, served in the House of Lords, managed my estates responsibly, fulfilled every obligation expected of my position. But I have never, in all those years, met anyone who made me want to defy convention, until you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you have courage. I know you value authenticity over artifice. I know you garden and read philosophy and care for orphans, according to my extremely thorough inquiries." His smile was slightly sheepish. "I may have been investigating you. I hope you don't find that intrusive." Despite herself, Marianne laughed. "I find it rather flattering, actually, though I'm curious what else your investigations uncovered. That your mother was beloved by everyone who knew her, that your father is respected in business circles for his integrity, that you volunteer at St. Margaret's Orphanage twice weekly, teaching the girls to read, that you play the pianoforte beautifully but claim to sing like a wounded cat." His expression grew more serious. "That you've faced this past week's cruelty with remarkable dignity, never once responding to the attacks or defending yourself publicly. What would be the point? Those who believe the lies wouldn't listen to truth, and those who know me need no defense." "Exactly." He took her hand, the gesture bold, but somehow feeling entirely right. "That's exactly the kind of wisdom I'm talking about. You see clearly through society's games because you've never been fully part of them. That outsider perspective is invaluable." Marianne looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, calloused in unexpected places that suggested he did more than simply give orders to estate managers. "What are you proposing, Alexander? Because if you're suggesting what I think you are, you need to understand the full implications. Lady Beatrice won't stop with gossip columns. She'll use every weapon at her disposal, and her arsenal is considerable." "Let her try." The steel in his voice surprised her. "I didn't survive 2 years of political battles in the House of Lords without learning how to fight. And make no mistake, Marianne, I am prepared to fight for this, for you." The drawing room suddenly felt too small, the air too charged with possibility and danger. Marianne pulled her hand gently from his, needing physical distance to think rationally. "You say that now, in the heat of the moment. But what happens when the reality sets in? When your friends and family pressure you? When society makes every social engagement an ordeal? When Lady Beatrice escalates beyond gossip to active sabotage? Then we face it together." He moved closer again, persistent in a way that was both exasperating and thrilling. "I'm not asking you to decide everything today. I'm simply asking permission to court you properly. Calls, drives in the park, attendance at events where we can be seen together. Let me show you and show society that my interest is serious and lasting." The offer was tempting beyond measure, but Marianne forced herself to consider the practical realities. "My father has modest means. I have no dowry worth mentioning, no connections that would benefit your position. What I do have is pride, Alexander, and I won't be seen as someone trading on your affections for material gain. Then it's fortunate that I have enough material wealth for both of us, and that what I'm seeking has nothing to do with financial considerations." He stepped back, giving her space, his expression patient. I understand your concerns. They're valid and speak to your character. But consider this. If we allow fear of others' judgment to dictate our choices, we surrender control of our own lives. I refuse to do that, and I suspect you do too. Before Mary Ann could respond, Mrs. Hastings appeared in the doorway with studied casualness. "Miss Mary Ann, shall I bring tea for His Grace?" The interruption provided a necessary moment to collect herself. "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Hastings. That would be lovely." As the housekeeper departed, Mary Ann caught Alexander's amused smile. "Your household staff are very protective. They loved my mother. By extension, they've adopted me as their personal responsibility." She gestured to the settee. "Shall we sit? This conversation seems destined to be lengthy." They settled into the drawing room's comfortable furniture, the physical distance helping Mary Ann think more clearly. Alexander lounged with aristocratic ease, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. He was nervous, she realized with surprise. This powerful, confident man was actually nervous about her response. "Tell me about Lady Beatrice," she said. "Help me understand what I'm facing." He grimaced. "She's the only daughter of the Earl of Ashford, raised to believe herself destined for the finest match available. Beautiful, accomplished, well-connected. On paper, she's everything society deems ideal in a duchess. But she's also calculating, cruel to those she considers beneath her, and absolutely ruthless in pursuing what she wants. My title and fortune have been her target for the past year. She's made her intentions abundantly clear, and my equally clear disinterest has only intensified her determination." Mrs. Hastings returned with tea, serving them with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual thousands of times. Once she departed, though Mary Ann suspected she lingered just outside the door, they continued their conversation over the delicate china cups. "Why me?" Mary Ann asked. "I keep asking because I genuinely don't understand. You could have your pick of suitable young ladies who would bring advantages I cannot." Alexander set down his teacup with careful precision. "Do you know what my life has been like since inheriting the title? Every conversation is calculated, every interaction transactional. People see the Duke, not the man. They want something: political support, financial investment, social elevation. Even friendships feel conditional, based on what I can provide rather than who I am." He paused, staring into his tea as though seeing the past reflected there. "When I saw you at the Ashworth ball, you were different. You weren't working the room, weren't positioning yourself strategically. You were simply observing, taking it all in with genuine curiosity rather than calculating advantage. And when I approached you, you looked at me like I was just a man, not a walking title and fortune." "You are just a man," Mary Ann said softly. "A man who happens to have responsibilities and resources, but a man nonetheless, that's what I see." "Exactly." His smile was tinged with something like relief. "That's exactly what I mean. You see me, Mary Ann. Not the Duke of Sinclair, not the political figure or the matrimonial prize, just Alexander. Do you know how rare that is, how precious?" The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep in Mary Ann's chest. She understood that loneliness, that sense of being valued for externals while one's true self remained invisible. Her own isolation had taught her to recognize genuine connection when she found it. "I do know," she said. "After my mother died, so many people paid condolence calls, but most of them were performing sympathy rather than feeling it. They said the right words, made the appropriate gestures, but there was no real understanding. Eleanor was different. She sat with me in silence when I couldn't bear false comfort, and she listened when I needed to talk. That authenticity was life-saving. Then you understand why I'm pursuing this connection despite the obstacles. Authenticity is worth fighting for." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily from serious topics to lighter subjects. Alexander was well-read and thoughtful, his opinions on politics and philosophy revealing a mind that questioned rather than simply accepted conventional wisdom. He made her laugh with dry observations about society's more ridiculous conventions, and he listened with genuine interest when she spoke about her work at the orphanage. When he finally rose to take his leave, the visit having stretched the bounds of propriety as far as they dared, Mary Ann felt both energized and apprehensive. She walked him to the door, where her father appeared to make his farewells. "Your Grace, you're welcome to call again," Thomas said, the words carrying weight beyond simple courtesy. though I trust you understand that my daughter's welfare is my primary concern. As it should be, sir. I assure you my intentions are entirely honourable. Alexander bowed to them both. Miss Whitmore, would you do me the honour of accompanying me for a drive in Hyde Park tomorrow afternoon? With your father's permission, of course. The invitation was public and proper, a clear statement of his serious interest. Accepting would make their connection officially visible to all of society, including Lady Beatrice. Refusing would be safer, but would also mean surrendering to fear. I would be delighted, Your Grace. His smile lit his entire face. Excellent. I'll call for you at 3 o'clock. After he left, Marianne stood at the window watching his carriage disappear down the street. Her father joined her, his expression thoughtful. That's a good man, he said. Reminds me of myself at his age, determined, principled, willing to fight for what matters. Your mother saw those qualities in me despite our differences in station. I believe the Duke sees similar qualities in you. Papa, are you giving me your blessing? Even knowing what it might mean? I'm giving you permission to follow your heart with your eyes open. The path ahead won't be easy, but your mother and I chose the difficult path, and we never regretted it. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. That night, Marianne lay awake long after the house fell silent, thinking about choices and consequences. Tomorrow's drive in Hyde Park would be her Rubicon, the point of no return. Once she was seen publicly with Alexander, Lady Beatrice's campaign against her would intensify, and there would be no going back to the quiet anonymity she'd maintained before. But what was the alternative? To let fear dictate her choices. To surrender the possibility of genuine connection because others disapproved. Her mother had faced similar criticism when she chose Thomas Whitmore, and she had been happy despite society's censure. The next afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth, the late autumn sun feeling almost like summer. Marianne dressed carefully in a carriage dress of deep green that complemented her colouring, her mother's pearls at her throat. Mrs. Hastings fussed over her appearance with maternal concern, adjusting her bonnet and smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. You look lovely, dear, though I wish this wasn't necessary. The park will be full of gossips today, which is precisely why we're going. Better to face them directly than allow speculation to grow unchecked. Alexander arrived promptly at 3 in an elegant open carriage pulled by matched greys. He helped her up with courteous attention, and they set off through London streets toward Hyde Park. The Rotten Row, the fashionable riding path, would be crowded at this hour with the ton displaying their finest horses and latest fashions. Ready? Alexander asked as they turned into the park. As ready as I'll ever be. They entered the main thoroughfare, and Marianne felt the weight of countless eyes upon them. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as they passed. Fans snapped open to hide whispered comments. Young ladies stared with undisguised curiosity, while their chaperones looked scandalized or calculating, depending on their temperaments. And then Marianne saw Lady Beatrice. She sat in an open landau with Lady Hertford, another prominent society figure known for her sharp tongue. Lady Beatrice wore a dress of pale pink silk that should have made her look delicate, but somehow appeared predatory. Her golden hair caught the sunlight, and her face was arranged in an expression of serene superiority that didn't quite mask the fury in her eyes. As their carriages drew level, protocol demanded at least a polite nod of acknowledgement. Alexander inclined his head with cool courtesy. Marianne followed suit, meeting Lady Beatrice's gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice called out, her voice carrying across the path. What a charming surprise. I wasn't aware you'd taken to frequenting the park at the fashionable hour. One usually associates you with more substantial pursuits. The insult was subtle but unmistakable, the implication that driving with Marianne was a frivolous waste of his time. Alexander's expression hardened. I find that the company determines the value of any pursuit, Lady Beatrice. In that regard, this afternoon surpasses most others in recent memory. The set-down was delivered with such polite precision that it took a moment for the full impact to register. Lady Hertford gasped audibly. Lady Beatrice's perfect composure cracked, her face flushing with humiliation and rage. "Indeed," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "One must be cautious about the company one keeps, Your Grace. Reputation is so easily tarnished by association with the wrong sort." "Quite right," Alexander agreed. which is why I'm increasingly selective about whose society I seek. Miss Whitmore's character and integrity make her company highly desirable. I wish you good day, Lady Beatrice." He guided the horses forward before she could respond, leaving her frozen in shock at being so publicly dismissed. Marianne sat rigid beside him, her heart pounding with a mixture of exhilaration and terror. The confrontation had been witnessed by dozens of people, and the story would be all over London by evening. "That was dangerous," she said quietly. "That was necessary. Lady Beatrice needed to understand that her campaign will not succeed in driving us apart. The more publicly I support you, the more difficult it becomes for her to spread lies unchallenged." They completed their circuit of the park, enduring stares and whispers with matched composure. Several of Alexander's friends stopped to make polite conversation, their curiosity thinly veiled. A few people were genuinely kind, including an elderly dowager who leaned from her carriage to compliment Marianne on her dress with what seemed like honest approval. When they finally left the park, Marianne felt emotionally exhausted. The constant scrutiny, the hostile glances, the whispered speculation, it was more draining than she'd anticipated. Alexander seemed to sense her weariness, guiding the horses through quieter streets toward her home. "You did beautifully," he said. "I know that wasn't easy." "No," she admitted. "But it was necessary, as you said, and I won't give Lady Beatrice the satisfaction of seeing me retreat." He pulled the carriage to a stop a discreet distance from her door, turning to face her. "Marianne, I want you to understand something. This won't get easier before it gets worse. Lady Beatrice won't simply accept defeat. She'll escalate, and her methods won't all be as straightforward as public insults." "I know, but I've made my choice, and I won't unmake it out of fear. Even if it costs you socially? Even if doors that were open to you close?" "What doors?" She laughed without humor. "I've never been fully accepted in those circles anyway. I have little to lose and potentially much to gain." His expression softened. "I'm beginning to think I'm the one gaining more in this bargain. Your courage puts mine to shame." They said their farewells with proper decorum, though Marianne was acutely aware of how much she wanted him to kiss her hand again, to feel that connection of skin on skin that made her pulse race. But the street was too public, and they'd already tested propriety enough for one day. Inside the house, Eleanor was waiting, having arrived in Marianne's absence. She pounced immediately, demanding every detail of the drive, her eyes growing wider with each revelation. "Marianne, you realize this means war? Lady Beatrice will be absolutely savage now. She's been publicly humiliated by the man she intended to marry, and she'll blame you entirely for it." "Let her blame me. I'm not responsible for Alexander's feelings or his choices. He's a grown man capable of making his own decisions." Eleanor shook her head in wonder. "You've changed so much in just a week. Where's the cautious friend who always counseled prudence?" She met someone who made prudence seem less important than authenticity. Marianne smiled, and she discovered she's stronger than she thought. The next few days proved both the wisdom and the danger of their public drive. Invitations arrived from several surprising sources, people who either admired their courage or simply wanted to be part of the drama. But other invitations were conspicuously withdrawn. Lady Mansfield, who had previously expressed interest in having Marianne attend her musicale, sent a terse note explaining that her guest list was now complete. The gossip columns were merciless. Some portrayed Marianne as a schemer who had somehow entrapped the Duke. Others suggested she was his mistress, rather than an honorable romantic interest. The attacks were sophisticated and varied, clearly orchestrated by someone with significant social influence and resources. Lady Beatrice's hand was evident in every cruel rumor, every closed door, every whispered speculation. She had mobilized her considerable network of friends and allies, and they were conducting a systematic campaign to isolate Marianne completely. But Alexander responded with equal determination. He called on Marianne almost daily, always with proper attention to propriety, but making his interest unmistakably clear. He escorted her to the theatre, sat with her at a concert, and most significantly, brought her to a political dinner where she met several influential members of Parliament and their wives. That dinner proved a turning point. Lady Hamilton, the formidable wife of a cabinet minister, took an immediate liking to Marianne. She was a woman who had risen from relative obscurity to become one of London's most respected hostesses, and she recognized a kindred spirit. "My dear," she said as the ladies withdrew after dinner, "you've set the cat among the pigeons, haven't you? Lady Beatrice has been making the rounds trying to poison everyone against you, but I've always made my own judgments about character, and I find yours exemplary. Thank you, Lady Hamilton. That means more than you know. The Duke is quite smitten." The older woman's smile was knowing. "I've watched him tonight, and he can't take his eyes off you. That kind of genuine attachment is rare in our circles. If you'll accept a word of advice, don't let the vipers win. Society respects strength, and those who weather early storms often find themselves more secure in the long run." The encouragement buoyed Marianne's spirits, but she remained realistic about the challenges ahead. Lady Beatrice was not finished, not by a considerable margin. The question was what form her next attack would take, and how prepared Marianne would be to counter it. The answer came 2 weeks after the Hyde Park drive, in a form Marianne had not anticipated. She was at St. Margaret's Orphanage, as was her habit every Tuesday and Thursday, teaching a group of young girls their letters. The children adored her patient instruction, and Marianne found peace in their uncomplicated affection. She was reading to them from a children's story when Mrs. Pemberton, the orphanage director, entered the classroom with an expression of distressed confusion. "Miss Whitmore, might I have a word? In my office, please." The formality of the request sent warning prickles down Marianne's spine. She excused herself from the children and followed Mrs. Pemberton to the small office at the front of the building. The older woman closed the door with obvious reluctance, her hands twisting together nervously. "I hardly know how to say this, my dear. I've received, that is, several members of our Board of Patrons have expressed concerns." Marianne's stomach dropped. "What sort of concerns?" "About your suitability as a volunteer. They claim that your recent visibility in society, the nature of your connection with the Duke, the gossip surrounding your character." Mrs. Pemberton looked miserable. "They've suggested that your continued presence here might reflect poorly on the orphanage's reputation." The betrayal stung more than any public insult could have. This place had been her sanctuary, her contribution to something meaningful beyond society's games, and now even this was being taken from her because of Lady Beatrice's vindictive campaign. "I see." Marianne kept her voice steady, despite the tears threatening. "And what is your position, Mrs. Pemberton?" "My position is that you've been one of our most dedicated volunteers, and that the children adore you, but I'm not the final authority. The board controls our funding, and if they insist—" She spread her hands helplessly. "I'm so terribly sorry, Marianne. This is unconscionable." "Who sits on the board?" Mrs. Pemberton hesitated, then sighed. "Lady Beatrice Ashford recently joined as a patron. She's made quite generous donations, which the orphanage desperately needs, and she's been very vocal about her concerns regarding your influence. Of course, Lady Beatrice had found the perfect weapon, use her wealth and position to strike at something Marianne truly cared about, to hurt her in ways that went beyond mere social embarrassment. It was a calculated and cruel attack, and it was devastatingly effective." "I understand." Marianne stood, fighting to maintain her composure. "Please tell the board that I will not create difficulties for the orphanage. I'll resign my volunteer position effective immediately. Marianne, please don't—" "It's all right, Mrs. Pemberton, truly. I won't have the children suffer because of my presence. Perhaps once this storm passes, we can revisit the situation. But for now, this is best." She left the orphanage with her dignity intact but her heart breaking. The children had called after her, confused by her sudden departure, and their bewildered voices echoed in her mind as she walked home through London's busy streets. This was the cost of defying Lady Beatrice, the price of choosing authenticity over safety. Marianne had known intellectually that there would be consequences, but experiencing the reality of those consequences was far more painful than she'd imagined. To be denied the simple right to help children learn their letters because of vicious gossip seemed cosmically unjust. She reached home to find Alexander's carriage already waiting. He must have heard somehow, because he stood in the drawing room looking thunderous, her father beside him with equal fury on his normally placid face. "I've just learned what happened," Alexander said the moment she entered. "Marianne, I'm so sorry. This is unconscionable." "It's effective," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Lady Beatrice has found my vulnerability and exploited it perfectly. I can endure gossip and social snubs, but taking away my ability to help those children—" Her voice broke, and she couldn't continue. Alexander crossed to her in 2 strides, propriety forgotten as he pulled her into his arms. She allowed herself to lean against his strength for just a moment, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Then she pulled away, knowing that surrendering to despair would only hand Lady Beatrice another victory. "No," she said firmly, "I won't let her win this way. There must be something we can do." "There is." Alexander's voice was cold with determination. "I'm going to pay Lady Beatrice a visit and make absolutely clear that her campaign ends now. I've tolerated her machinations out of a misguided sense that ignoring her was the dignified approach. But this crosses every line. Alexander confronting her directly will only escalate. Good, let it escalate. I'm done playing defensive. It's time Lady Beatrice understood that actions have consequences." Marianne saw the steel in his eyes and recognized that arguing would be futile. He had reached his breaking point, and honestly, so had she. Perhaps direct confrontation was exactly what the situation required. "Then I'm coming with you." Both men started to protest, but Marianne raised her hand to silence them. "No, this fight is about me, not just your honor, Alexander. I won't hide while you battle on my behalf. If we're doing this, we're doing it together." The Ashford residence loomed before them, a testament to old money and older privilege. 3 stories of Georgian architecture stood pristine and imposing, its facade proclaiming the family's centuries of social dominance. Marianne felt her courage waver as their carriage pulled to a stop, but Alexander's hand found hers, squeezing gently in encouragement. "We present a united front," he said. "Whatever happens in there, we face it together." The butler who answered showed them to a morning room decorated in shades of cream and gold, every surface gleaming with the kind of perfection that required an army of servants. Lady Beatrice kept them waiting exactly long enough to demonstrate her power, but not so long as to appear discourteous. When she finally swept into the room, she wore a morning dress of sapphire silk that matched her cold eyes, her expression one of barely concealed triumph. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure, and Miss Whitmore." The pause before Marianne's name was deliberate, weighted with disdain. "To what do I owe this visit?" Alexander didn't bother with pleasantries. "Your campaign against Miss Whitmore ends today, Lady Beatrice. I'm here to make that abundantly clear." Lady Beatrice's eyebrows arched in feigned surprise. "Campaign? Your Grace, I'm afraid I don't understand. If Miss Whitmore has encountered social difficulties, perhaps she should examine her own choices rather than blame others. Don't insult my intelligence with false innocence." Alexander's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I know you've been systematically spreading lies about Miss Whitmore's character. I know you orchestrated her removal from St. Margaret's orphanage, and I know you've used your influence to close doors that would otherwise be open to her. Prove it." Lady Beatrice's smile was razor-sharp. "Society forms its own opinions, Your Grace. I can hardly be held responsible for what people choose to believe." Marianne stepped forward, her fear evaporating in the face of Lady Beatrice's smugness. "You're absolutely right that society forms opinions, but those opinions are often shaped by whisper campaigns from influential people, people like you, who use their position to destroy others out of petty jealousy." Lady Beatrice's mask slipped, fury blazing in her eyes. "Jealousy of you? A nobody from nowhere with delusions of grandeur? You're a fortune hunter who saw an opportunity and seized it. Propriety be damned." "No," Marianne said calmly, though her heart raced. "I'm someone who accepted a dance invitation from a man I found interesting. Everything that followed was your doing, not mine. You created this situation by refusing to accept that the Duke is capable of making his own choices." "Choices?" Lady Beatrice laughed, the sound brittle and bitter. "He's been bewitched by your false modesty and calculated displays of virtue. But I know women like you. You're all the same. Manipulative social climbers who—" "Enough!" Alexander's voice cracked like a whip. "Lady Beatrice, you will cease these attacks immediately. You will publicly retract your insinuations about Miss Whitmore's character, and you will resign from the board of St. Margaret's orphanage, effective today." "Or what?" Lady Beatrice's smile was poisonous. "You'll what, Your Grace? Marry her? Make this little nobody a duchess? Society would never accept it. Your family would never accept it. You'd be throwing away centuries of privilege and position for a woman whose own mother was barely gentry. My mother, Marianne said, her voice shaking with controlled rage, was worth 10 of you. She had more grace and dignity in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire being. And yes, she was gentry, not nobility. But she taught me that true worth has nothing to do with titles and everything to do with character. Something you clearly lack. The confrontation had attracted attention. The drawing-room door stood ajar, and Marianne could see the Earl of Ashford, Lady Beatrice's father, in the hallway with several other family members. How much they'd heard was unclear, but the Earl's expression suggested enough. Beatrice. The Earl entered the room, his face grave. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private. There's nothing private about this, father. The Duke has come here to threaten me on behalf of his mistress. She is not my mistress. Alexander's words were ice. She is a lady I am courting with honorable intentions, and if you continue to slander her, I will take legal action. Defamation laws apply even to the nobility, Lady Beatrice. The Earl's face paled. A lawsuit, even if ultimately unsuccessful, would be socially catastrophic. The scandal would attach to the entire Ashford family, and Lady Beatrice's already damaged marriage prospects would be completely destroyed. Your Grace, surely we can resolve this amicably, the Earl began, but Alexander cut him off. The resolution is simple. Lady Beatrice retracts her statements, ceases all attacks on Miss Whitmore, and removes herself from any position where she might cause further harm. In return, I'll consider the matter closed. Otherwise, I'll ensure that every person in London understands exactly what she's done and why. Lady Beatrice looked to her father, clearly expecting him to defend her. But the Earl's expression was one of disappointment rather than support. He was a practical man who understood that his daughter had overplayed her hand catastrophically. Beatrice apologized to Miss Whitmore. Father, you cannot be serious. Apologize. Now. The battle of wills played out in silence until Lady Beatrice finally looked at Marianne, her eyes burning with hatred barely contained. I apologize for any misunderstandings my words may have caused. It was the weakest apology possible, delivered with no sincerity whatsoever. But Marianne recognized it for what it was, a public surrender, witnessed by family members who would ensure the story spread. Lady Beatrice's campaign had failed, and she would bear the social consequences of that failure. I accept your apology, Marianne said with more grace than the moment deserved. And I hope you'll find happiness elsewhere, Lady Beatrice. Surely there are gentlemen who would appreciate your many accomplishments. The kindness, delivered in the face of such cruelty, seemed to unbalance Lady Beatrice more than any counterattack could have. She stared at Marianne as though seeing her clearly for the first time, and something shifted in her expression. Not repentance exactly, but perhaps the first glimmer of self-awareness. Alexander and Marianne took their leave shortly after, the confrontation having drained them both. In the carriage they sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. That was either brilliant or completely insane, Marianne finally said. Possibly both. Alexander laughed, tension releasing in the sound. But necessary. She needed to understand that intimidation wouldn't work, that continuing her attacks would cost her more than victory could possibly gain. Do you think it's truly over? With Lady Beatrice? Yes. She's too intelligent not to recognize when retreat is the only viable strategy. She'll save face by claiming she's redirected her attention to more worthy pursuits, and society will pretend to believe her. In a month, there will be new scandals to occupy everyone's attention. Marianne hoped he was right but remained cautious. Lady Beatrice had been humiliated twice now, first by Alexander's public preference for Marianne, and now by being forced to apologize. Such wounds to pride sometimes festered rather than healed. But the immediate crisis had passed, and Marianne felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she'd carried for weeks, finally releasing. They were still facing social obstacles, still navigating the complexities of their different positions, but they'd proven they could stand together against opposition, could fight as a united front when necessary. The next morning brought surprising news. Lady Hamilton called on Marianne, arriving in her elegant barouche with an air of satisfaction. My dear, I've just come from the most fascinating breakfast. It seems Lady Beatrice Ashford has suddenly developed an interest in charitable work in the country, and will be leaving London for several months. Her father insists the change of scenery will do her good." Marianne understood the subtext immediately. The Earl had removed his daughter from London before she could cause further damage to the family's reputation. It was a tactical retreat, dressed up as charitable impulses. "How considerate of her," Marianne said carefully. Lady Hamilton's smile was knowing. "Indeed, and in her absence I've taken the liberty of speaking with several influential ladies about your work at St. Margaret's. We're all agreed that your removal was premature and based on false information. Mrs. Pemberton will be receiving communications to that effect today." Tears pricked Marianne's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Lady Hamilton, I don't know how to thank you." "Nonsense. I simply corrected an injustice. Besides, I've always believed that society benefits from new blood and fresh perspectives. You and the Duke are precisely the sort of couple we need, people who value substance over superficiality." Over the following weeks, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Without Lady Beatrice's constant campaign of whispers and innuendo, opinion began to turn in Marianne's favour. Her story, a young woman of modest means who had captured a duke's heart through genuine character rather than calculated manoeuvring, appealed to the romantic sensibilities many secretly harboured beneath their cynical exteriors. Invitations began arriving with increasing frequency. Some were motivated by curiosity, others by genuine goodwill. Marianne accepted selectively, attending events where she felt comfortable, and declining those that seemed designed merely to gawk at the season's most intriguing scandal. Alexander remained constant throughout, his attentions unwavering despite the social turbulence. He called regularly, escorted her to concerts and dinners, and introduced her to his closest friends with obvious pride. His family proved more complicated. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, maintained a chilly reserve that suggested acceptance would not come easily. But his younger sister, Lady Caroline, took an immediate liking to Marianne, declaring her refreshingly honest after their first meeting. Christmas approached, bringing with it the traditional season's end. Many families would retreat to their country estates, and London would quiet until spring brought a new crop of debutantes and fresh dramas. Marianne had expected Alexander to depart for his ancestral seat in Derbyshire, but he showed no signs of leaving. Instead, he arrived at her door one snowy December morning with a request that took her completely by surprise. "Come with me," he said, his eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "I want to show you something." They drove through London's snow-covered streets to a townhouse in Bloomsbury, not far from Marianne's own modest home. The building was elegant but not ostentatious, its red brick facade warm and welcoming. Alexander helped her from the carriage and produced a key with ceremonial flourish. "What is this place?" Marianne asked as he unlocked the door. "A property I recently acquired. Come inside." The interior was beautifully appointed but clearly uninhabited. Dust covers draped the furniture, and the air had the still quality of spaces waiting to be brought to life. Alexander led her through rooms filled with winter light, streaming through tall windows, his excitement palpable. "I bought it 3 weeks ago," he said. "The location is perfect, close to your father's home, near the orphanage, convenient to Parliament. And the library—" He opened a door to reveal a room lined floor to ceiling with empty shelves. "I thought you might like to help fill these shelves. Choose books that matter to you. Create a collection that reflects your interests rather than traditional expectations." Marianne stared at the empty library, understanding dawning slowly. "Alexander, what are you saying?" He turned to face her, and she saw vulnerability in his expression, the careful hope of someone risking rejection. "I'm saying that I love you, Marianne. I've loved you since that first waltz, when you looked at me like I was just a man instead of a title. I'm saying I want to build a life with you, one that honors both of our values, rather than conforming to society's arbitrary rules." Her breath caught, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "We've known each other barely 2 months. I've known you long enough to understand what matters. You're brave and kind and absolutely authentic. You challenge me to be better, to see beyond the narrow confines of my position. And you make me laugh, Marianne. You make me feel like myself, rather than the role I'm expected to play." He took her hands, his grip warm and sure. "I know the obstacles remain formidable. My mother will need time to accept this. Society will gossip endlessly. There will be difficult moments and painful confrontations, but I believe we can face them together and emerge stronger for it. Marianne looked around the empty library, seeing it transformed in her mind's eye. Books lining the shelves, comfortable chairs for reading, perhaps a desk where she could write. A life built on shared values and genuine partnership rather than social positioning. It was everything she dared not hope for, offered by a man who saw her truly and loved her anyway. "I love you too," she said, the words emerging with the force of long-suppressed truth. "I think I've loved you since you walked across that ballroom toward me, risking scandal and social awkwardness because you trusted your instincts. You're the bravest person I know, Alexander." His smile blazed like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then you'll marry me? You'll let me spend the rest of my life proving that character matters more than circumstance?" "Yes." The word was simple, but it carried the weight of her entire future. "Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms, and this time there were no witnesses to worry about, no propriety to maintain. His kiss was everything she'd imagined and more, tender and passionate and absolutely certain. Marianne lost herself in the feeling, in the solid strength of his embrace and the knowledge that this was real, that love had somehow found her despite all the obstacles arrayed against it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I should ask your father's permission formally, though I confess I'm not worried about his answer. No, Papa likes you. He sees in you the same qualities my mother must have seen in him. Integrity, courage, the willingness to fight for what matters." They spent another hour exploring the townhouse, Alexander sharing his vision for their future home, while Marianne contributed her own ideas. It would be a place of warmth and intellectual stimulation, where political reformers and artists could mingle with educators and philosophers, a home that reflected their shared values rather than merely displaying wealth and status. The formal proposal came that evening in Thomas Whitmore's library, with all the ceremony tradition demanded. Her father listened to Alexander's carefully prepared speech about his intentions and prospects, his ability to provide for Marianne and protect her from society's harsher judgments. When Alexander finished, Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his expression grave. "Your Grace, I'll be honest with you. My daughter is the most precious thing in my world. Her mother and I raised her to value character over circumstance, to see people as they truly are, rather than what they appear to be. You've proven yourself worthy of her in ways that have nothing to do with your title or fortune." He paused, and Marianne saw moisture glinting in his eyes. "But I must also acknowledge that this marriage will place her in a position she wasn't raised for. She'll face scrutiny and criticism, endless social obligations, expectations that may feel suffocating at times. Can you promise me that you'll support her through those challenges, that you'll never ask her to become someone she's not simply to satisfy convention?" "Sir, I can promise that absolutely. One of the things I love most about Marianne is her authenticity. I would no more ask her to change that than I would ask the sun to stop shining. We'll navigate society's demands together, finding ways to honor necessary conventions while remaining true to ourselves." Thomas extended his hand, and Alexander shook it firmly, sealing the agreement between men who understood the weight of such promises. Marianne watched through tears of joy, seeing her father pass the responsibility of her happiness to someone who would cherish and protect it. The engagement was announced in the Times the following morning, creating exactly the sensation they'd anticipated. The gossip columns exploded with speculation and commentary, some kind, some cruel, all intensely curious about the love story that had captivated London's attention. Lady Hamilton hosted an engagement party that became one of the season's most talked-about events. She'd used her considerable influence to ensure that everyone who mattered attended, effectively giving her stamp of approval to the match. Even the Dowager Duchess came, though her manner remained frosty. But Lady Caroline more than compensated, embracing Marianne warmly and declaring herself thrilled to have a sister who read philosophy and cared about social reform. Through it all, Marianne held fast to her mother's teachings about dignity and grace under pressure. She endured the whispers with composure, responded to criticism with courtesy, and slowly won over even some of her harshest critics through the simple expedient of being herself. The wedding took place in early spring, when London was awakening from winter's grip, and the parks bloomed with daffodils and crocuses. They chose a modest ceremony rather than the grand spectacle Alexander's position might have warranted. St. James's Church was filled with people who genuinely cared for them rather than those seeking social advantage, friends, family, the children from St. Margaret's orphanage who sang with angelic sweetness, and a carefully curated selection of society figures who had proven themselves true allies. Mary Ann wore her mother's wedding dress, altered slightly to fit, but retaining the simple elegance that had characterized all of her mother's choices. Eleanor served as her attendant, crying happy tears throughout the ceremony. Thomas walked his daughter down the aisle with pride evident in every step, though Mary Ann saw him touch his pocket, where he carried a miniature portrait of his late wife, as though including her in this moment. Alexander waited at the altar in formal dress, his expression transforming when he saw Mary Ann approaching. All the careful control he maintained in public fell away, revealing pure, unguarded joy. When they spoke their vows, their voices were steady and certain, two people who had found each other against considerable odds and chosen to build a life together. The breakfast that followed was intimate and joyful, filled with laughter and genuine celebration. Even the Dowager Duchess thawed slightly, offering Mary Ann a stiff but sincere welcome to the family. Lady Caroline gave a toast that had everyone laughing, recounting her brother's transformation from confirmed bachelor to devoted suitor with fond irreverence. As the afternoon faded into evening and guests began departing, Alexander and Mary Ann finally found a moment of privacy in the garden of the Sinclair townhouse where the celebration had been held. The spring air carried the scent of early roses, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Happy?" Alexander asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." Mary Ann leaned into his embrace, marveling at how right it felt, how completely this man had become her home. "Though I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream. If it is, we're sharing the same dream, and I have no intention of waking." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then finally her lips, with tender passion that promised a lifetime of such moments. When they broke apart, Mary Ann looked up at the emerging stars, remembering that night before the Ashworth ball when she'd stood at her window wishing for courage. So much had changed since then. She'd found love, yes, but more importantly, she'd discovered her own strength. She'd faced opposition and cruelty, and emerged not just intact but stronger, more certain of who she was and what she valued. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked. "That wishes do come true, but not quite the way we expect. I wished for courage, and I got that. But I also got you, and a life I never dared imagine, and proof that being authentic is always better than trying to be what others expect." Wise words from a duchess. She smiled at the title, still adjusting to its weight. A duchess who plans to keep teaching at the orphanage, hosting salons for political reformers, and generally making the dowagers shake their heads in disapproval. Perfect. I wouldn't want you any other way. They stood together as night fell over London, two people who had defied convention and found something precious in the process. The road ahead would have its challenges. Society never fully forgave those who refused to play by its rules. But they would face those challenges together, secure in the knowledge that they had chosen each other freely and completely. Months later, when Mary Ann held her first proper salon in their Bloomsbury townhouse, the guest list included politicians and poets, educators and reformers, society ladies, and working-class activists. It was exactly the kind of gathering that would have scandalized traditional hostesses, and exactly the kind of evening Mary Ann loved, full of passionate debate and genuine connection. Alexander stood at her side, watching her navigate conversations with grace and intelligence, and felt gratitude wash over him. He'd been right that night at the Ashworth ball. She was extraordinary, and choosing her had been the best decision of his life. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Mary Ann found him in the library, staring at the now full shelves they'd populated together over the past months. "Successful evening?" he asked. "Very. Lord Pemberton actually listened to my ideas about education reform, and Lady Hamilton is organizing a fundraiser for the orphanage. I think we're making progress, slowly but surely." "We are." He pulled her into his arms, content in a way he'd never been before she entered his life. "Did I mention today that I love you?" Only 3 times. You're slipping." He laughed and kissed her, deep and passionate, a promise and a celebration all at once. And as Marianne lost herself in his embrace, she thought again of that wish she'd made to the moon, of the courage she'd asked for, and the love she'd found. The fairy tales of her childhood had always ended with happily ever after, as though happiness were a destination rather than a journey. But Marianne understood now that real love was something you built daily, through small acts of kindness and large gestures of courage, through standing together against opposition and celebrating triumphs side by side. This was her happily ever after, not perfect, not without challenges, but absolutely real and infinitely precious. She had found her place, not despite her origins, but because of them. She had found a partner who valued her truth more than social approval. And she had found the courage to be fully herself, in a world that often demanded conformity. Lady Beatrice had said she shouldn't be there at that ball, in those rarefied social circles. But Marianne had proven her wrong in every way that mattered. She belonged exactly where she was, in Alexander's arms, in a life they'd chosen together, in a love that had survived everything society could throw at it. And that, she thought as Alexander spun her in an impromptu waltz around their library, was the best kind of happy ending. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey with Marianne and Alexander. Their story reminds us that true love requires courage, that authenticity matters more than approval, and that standing up for what we believe in can lead to the most beautiful destinations. If you enjoyed this tale of romance, resilience, and choosing love over convention, we would be absolutely delighted if you would subscribe to Echoes of Romance. Your subscription helps us continue bringing you these heartfelt stories of love conquering all obstacles. Please take a moment to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Did Marianne and Alexander's journey touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? We love hearing from you, and your feedback inspires us to create even more beautiful stories. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and activate your notifications so you never miss a new tale of romance and courage. Each story we share is crafted with love, and your support means the world to us. Until next time, may you find the courage to be authentically yourself, just like Marianne, and may love find you in the most unexpected places. With warmest regards, Echoes of Romance.